Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the last in our Wednesday webinar series for the year. And this session is entitled Lines of Speech, Hate Harm and the Laws Across Borders. And during the session this afternoon, we're going to talk about how hate speech is defined and regulated across different European countries, and specifically how media literacy can support individuals in navigating the legal and ethical boundaries of digital expression and rights. So my name is Sally Reynolds. I'm delighted to be moderating the session this afternoon. And thank you, Chloe. As you can see on the screen, we are delighted to welcome three speakers this afternoon. We're going to start with Renato Sabbadini, doctoral researcher at the Law, Science, Technology and Society Research Group and member of the Health and Aging Law Lab in the Vrije Universiteit here in Belgium. We're also hoping to be joined by Maja Zarić, who's Vice Chair of the Council of Europe Steering Committee on Media and Freedom of Expression. And our third speaker this afternoon will be Elena Haig. And Elena is a legal and policy officer working on fundamental rights policy at DG Justice, the European Commission. So during the session this afternoon, we're going to hear from our three speakers. You're very welcome to put questions or points of view that you'd like me to put to them into the chat. You can see the chat window is available for everybody to use, and I'll put your questions to our speakers right after their presentations. And then afterwards, we'll also have a chance for a group discussion to maybe go back into some of the points that are raised. Couple of house rules or a couple of house points I'd like to share with you. First of all, we are recording this session and we will make it available afterwards to everybody who's registered for the session this afternoon. We ask, if you can, to please keep your cameras on because it's lovely to see people's faces. Thank you to those of you that are doing that already. But if you could keep your microphones off, of course, during the session as well. Otherwise, we get lots of interference. Also, if you could take a look at your name of how you're listed under participants on the list, and if you could change it to indicate your name and the institution you're coming from, that often helps people in terms of being able to reach out. Or if you've got a name like iPhone or whatever, change it to your name. And the way you can do that is by clicking on the three little dots to the right of your name, and that allows you to change your name. It helps us to know who's actually in the session this afternoon. We will, of course, give you also an evaluation form afterwards to get your feedback in order to figure out how better we can do these sessions for everybody. So I think everybody's with us. I see a lot of people signed up and registered for the session this afternoon. So I think without any further ado, I'd like to hand straight over to Renato, who's our first speaker for the afternoon. So Renato, if you'd like to share your slides with us.
Good afternoon, indeed.
Thank you.
Happy to be here. And now let's see if it goes straight where I want it to go. It should be this one.
Thank you. Yes, we're about to see something. Almost.
Yeah. Fantastic. So my name is Renato Sabbadini, and as said, I'm a doctoral researcher at the Vrije Universiteit Brussel. And I was asked also here on this occasion to present a project of which VUB is a partner, a project called Eclipse, and which started very recently in September, and that deals indeed with combating hate speech online. And so just, of course, let's see. Voila. So the complete name is there, as usual, as it's common practice. European projects have short names for very long, complete names. So this one is about preventing and combating online and offline hate speech and disinformation through multidisciplinary innovation, education, and awareness in Europe. And these are, of course, if you that it's a 3-year project for a budget of roughly 3 million. And in a nutshell, the Eclipse project aims to develop innovative tools, training methods, and techniques to combating hate speech and disinformation, both online and offline, combining advanced technologies with insights from social, behavioral, and legal sciences. The role of VUB in this project is to, we are basically the legal partner, but we deal also with ethics issues, and we have our own work package 7. These, I guess you will get the presentations at some point later. So here you can see who the different 22 partners of the project, which include universities, law enforcement agencies, and civil society organizations. In particular, our initial role is, as outlined in the description of this task, but very briefly, how can I say, we have to compile first a benchmark of the relevant legislation. And in this sense, we will look at both at what international law says, but also at what European law says, particularly the Digital Services Act. And also we will look carefully at the national legislation, because this project will have 4 pilots, one in Belgium, one in Italy, one in Spain, and the 4th one I cannot remember right now. But for the reason that we shall see very soon, when it comes to hate speech and definitions, etc., it is crucial to look at what the national legislation says, okay? Because in a sense, at the European level, there is no official definition, or if it is, as you shall see, it is very broad, but then member states are encouraged to include new categories and make the definition more precise, so to speak. Of course, because the tool to tell you briefly, the approach that will be adopted within this project, especially when it comes to hate speech online, is not so much of persecution or reporting, but rather of creating the conditions to provide in online platforms, particularly chat rooms and other communication channels of this kind, that whenever instances of hate speech are identified by an AI model, that counter narratives can be produced and elicited and produced that somehow counteract the information withheld in the hate speech sample. So because of this feature, the project we will also have to analyze the implications of the recently adopted Artificial Intelligence Act. Voila. Let's now deal with a few definitions, and then we can take it, I guess, to a debate. Of course, I will limit myself to the essential, considering the limitations of time, but I'm open to questions, of course. So let's say if we take at what is the major piece of legislation, of EU legislation dealing with digital, very large digital platform in this case, is the DSA, the Digital Services Act. And in it, interestingly enough, we don't find a definition of hate speech among the definition given by the piece of legislation. Instead, we find at Article 3 of the definitions, there is definitions of illegal content, okay? Means any information that in itself or in relation to an activity, including the sale of products or the provision of services, is not in compliance with union law or the law of any member state, which is in compliance with union law, irrespective of the precise subject matter or nature. Okay, so the DSA deals primarily among the other things, with the removal of illegal content that, as you can see, is quite a broad definition. However, in the recitals that precede the articles of this piece of legislation, the term hate speech appears several times, and there's always a reference to a code of conduct of countering illegal hate speech online by the Commission of 2016, which is why, in a sense, the first route in relation to the hate speech within the DSA sends us back to this code of conduct, which was a very short code of conduct agreed with a few large tech companies in 2016, and where illegal hate speech is said as defined by the Framework Decision 2008-913 GHA of 28 November 2008, combating certain forms and expression of racism and xenophobia by means of criminal law. And so in this part of the criminal code, hate speech is defined all conduct publicly inciting to violence or hatred directed against, sorry if I hesitate from time, but I need to move the window. Criminal law and against a group, person, or a member of such group defined by reference to race, color, religion, descent, nationality, or ethnic origin. In reality, let's say that this is quite a innovation in the interpretation of the original framework decision. Because if we go back to that, which is immediately underneath, we can see, first of all, that there's no mention of the term hate, but rather of its alternate hatred, which is defined in a rather circular manner, saying in Recital 9, hatred should be understood as referring to hatred based on race, color, religion, descent, or ethnic origin. Interestingly enough, also, there's no mention of speech or hate speech in the framework decision. Rather, this was a framework decision which was adopted to combat racism and xenophobia, but targeted mainly conduct. And among the various forms of conduct, we find, for instance, two, which were described as follows. A, publicly inciting to violence or hatred directed against a group of etc., or the commission of an act referred to point A by public dissemination or distribution of tracts, pictures, or other material, etc. So we can see that although the term speech is not mentioned, the interpretation of the Code of Conduct of 2016 somehow subsumes under the term speech what is a conduct of public incitement, okay? Incitement in a public place, on a public platform. So this is what we have as the legal basis within the EU law, that provides the tools to consider hate speech as illegal, even though, mind you, in the DSA, the expression that you will find whenever hate speech is mentioned in the articles of the legislation is always illegal hate speech, okay? The assumption being that there will be presumably also hate speech which is not illegal, okay? For what concerns the definitions in the national legislation, I only took examples from two countries, but of course we will carry out a careful comparison between different countries, the legislation in different countries within the context of the benchmark that we are preparing for the Eclipse project. As can be expected, not all the pieces of legislation in the various member states are the same. They do not all tackle the issue in the same manner. Although there is always a common root, which goes quite back in history, goes back to the 60s and 70s, particularly to the prompt given by the United Nations with the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Racism. That is, let's say, the first, how can I say, invitation to act, request to act to the member states of the United Nations in adopted measures targeting what we today call hate speech, albeit at that time limited to the category of racism. But so gradually, various member states then begin to adopt legislation that tries to comply with what requested at the level of the UN, and that gradually is also modified and or adopted, also based on the prompts received by civil society or public opinion in the cases of of incidents of hatred that led to certain facts, etc., etc. So all these pieces of legislation have a common origin, okay, but may have a very different ways of being, how can I say, of expressing themselves through language, and may have different targets. For instance, in Italy, my country, there was a modification of the penal code which defined the crime of propaganda and incitement to commit a crime for reasons of discrimination, okay, in Article 604 bis. And as you can see, it lays out, of course, the punishment, etc. And it targets those who propagate idea based on ethnic superiority or hatred, or instigate to commit or committed discriminatory acts based on the same grounds. In the case of Italy, for instance, still today, there is no specific mention, for instance, for other characteristics like sexual orientation or gender identity, etc. There was a bill proposed in the past legislature, which then led to nowhere as a new government settled in a couple of years ago. I'm not sure there is currently any hope for this integration, although judges may, at the level at their own level, decide to also include these categories as aggravating circumstances. Okay, so in this sense, one could also target include sexual orientation, for instance, in the reasons within the concept of hate speech. In Germany, also there was initially a change in the penal code, in the criminal code, and which included, again, it all started, as you can imagine, in the case of Germany, also taking into consideration the history of the country. So in particular, there was, yes, the basis were racial, national, religious, of ethnic background, but it included also things like denial of the Holocaust, okay? However, Germany itself at some point decided that the online environment was something more specific, and therefore adopted also in 2017 a network enforcement act that is more specific to the ways in which hate speech has to be removed online, and what are the penalties if that is not done promptly, and voila. So these are just two examples. In the benchmark for the Eclipse project, we will include more, and we will go more into details, also taking into account, of course, of the case law, which is very important in this case. The European Court of Human Rights has by now a history of pronouncing itself on many cases in which we see the counterposition of hate speech, instances of hate speech, but also the defense of free speech, because this is the other side of the medal that needs to be included in the debate. And voila, for the time being, I think I'm looking at the watch. I can stop here, but I'm open to question either now or later on.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Renato. And it's difficult stuff to get your head around, I have to say, but thank you very much for taking us this far. And we are, of course, open for questions and for discussion. And it's interesting that you mentioned free speech, because in fact, the first question that we do have is coming, and you can see it there in the chat, is coming from Dorina Rosu. And she said, would the free speech be affected through these policies, and how social media will be affected? Renato.
Well, I think the big elephant in the room here is that if we compare, for instance, the various systems of law in the European continent and those of the United States, we have this big divide because, for instance, in America, in the US, despite, I don't know if you are familiar, there was a person killed a few months ago called Charlie Kirk. And it was said that it was because he was a purveyor of hate speech, etc. Other supporters said that he was killed because of hate speech. And the US attorney, Pamela Bondi, said on national television in the US, well, there is free speech and there is hate speech. Which would make sense in the European system of law, but it doesn't make any sense in the US system of law, where the First Amendment does not recognize any hate speech. Okay, hate speech is free speech from this point of view. So I think we need to take that element into account. On one hand, because most of the big tech platforms that are used for reading ideas, propagating ideas, commenting, etc., are based in the US. And so if you find yourself in places where there is a large interaction among citizens of the EU on one hand and the US on the other hand, utterances that for the US citizens might be considered very simple instances of free speech would be perceived or received from European citizens as instances of hate speech. So what I would say in this case is that indeed we need to look at the debate, especially because in this globalized world, utterances of someone are not confined to their jurisdiction. So this does complicate things.
Renato, thank you so much. And you're going to stay with us for the rest of the session. I'm sure we'll come back. And I think, as Chloe has posted in the chat as well too, there's some very specific language being used here, some very specific definitions. Please feel free to ask any questions that you can. And I assume with Eclipse as well too, part of the project will be about preparing resources for people to understand some of these quite complicated legal constructs that you're sharing with us, Renato, today.
Yes.
Yeah. So we'll hopefully, exactly. So we'll be staying in contact. And I'm also conscious of the fact that we do have quite an international audience with us this afternoon. So it's not just people from Europe. So that, of course, makes the discussion even more interesting, of course, but also complicated. But we're going to move on with our agenda now. And in fact, we're doing a slight change. Our second speaker this afternoon is going to be Elena Haig. So we're delighted to have Elena join us. She's a legal and policy officer working on fundamental rights policy at DG Justice and the European Commission. Elena, you're very welcome. Over to you.
Hi, good afternoon, and apologies for having been slightly late. I was traveling and there were some delays.
It's good to have you here.
And I'm very happy that I also got to listen to the last part of the previous presentation. I think it ties in quite well with what I will talk about. So indeed, my name is Elena Haig. I'm a legal and policy officer at the Directorate General for Justice and Consumers in the European Commission. Great, I see my slides are up as well, and I'll be presenting to you the perspective. So from the European Union perspective, what has been the legal, the overall response to hate speech and hate crime at European level. Exactly. So I'll cover briefly the legal framework that we have in place at EU level to combat hate speech and hate crime. As well as then the policy framework and some interesting recent developments in relation to combating hate speech, combating criminalized hate speech online. So to this, I think first slide gives you a short overview of the legal framework. So at European Union level, we have a fairly old instrument from 2008, which is the Council Framework Decision on Combating Racism and Xenophobia. And this is basically the key law at union level that regulates the criminal response to racist and xenophobic hate speech and hate crime. And is also in line with the recognition, this is also mentioned previously, that freedom of expression is a fundamental right, free speech is a fundamental right, and an important building block of our democracy, but it's not absolute. And when it reaches a certain threshold, which is the incitement to violence or hatred against specific groups, it does not fall under the protection of freedom of speech anymore. And so the Council Framework Decision recognizes this. Then, of course, we also have national criminal law transposing this EU law and providing basically for the definitions of hate crime and hate speech in their national legal system. Afterwards, I'll go into the policy actions, but we can move to the next slide. Exactly. So what we have is the EU level definition of hate speech is basically, I pasted it here directly from the framework decision. So it's publicly inciting to violence or hatred directed against a group of persons or a member of such group defined by reference to race, color, religion, descent, or national or ethnic origin. So important here is to note that the framework decision only covers hate offenses broadly based on racist or xenophobic grounds. And we also recently adopted the Violence Against Women Directive, which includes protections against online hate speech on the basis of gender. So there's another element or another protected ground that recently entered or became subject of EU law. So the Council Framework Decision has a quite particular scope, I would say, and that is very much in line with the links to needing to protect the freedom of expression, but also recognizing that public incitement to violence or hatred should not fall under that protected umbrella. So the framework decision has concrete elements that differentiate this threshold. One of the important ones being the publicity element, so speech towards the public. So of course that can be online and other instances. That also includes the public dissemination of tracts or pictures or other materials. So this could, for instance, if we stay in the online sphere, be memes, for example. The other interesting part about this EU level legal framework is that the framework decision also provides for the criminal definition of a specific type of hate speech, which is the public condoning, denying, or gross trivialization of genocide and crimes against humanity and war crimes, as well as the Holocaust as defined in the 1945 London Charter. So this is in relation to hate speech. Then the framework decision also has provisions on aggravating circumstances for other crimes to be identified as hate crimes when there's a discriminatory element. Then on this, I think it's also interesting to note, it was mentioned that not everyone in the call today is from the EU context. So just to clarify that the application of this specific law, as well as the prosecution, is a matter of national EU member state competence. So it's for the national courts to assess what specific instance of speech constitutes hate speech and would thereby fall in the framework or within the umbrella of the framework decision. So it's the national courts who determine the facts, and this is not done at the European Union level. So not by the Commission nor by the two legislators, so the European Parliament and the Council. We have been working and prioritizing over the last years to ensure the correct implementation of the framework decision, and have launched several infringement procedures, for instance, against member states who have not correctly transposed some elements of the framework decision, and only very few remain open, with positive developments underway as well. So this, I would say, is the basis of the work and provides really the legal background to what is considered also criminalized hate speech in the European Union context. And I think it's important to keep that in mind also for discussions around the policy response, the obligations of other stakeholders, for example, social media platforms, that the threshold is really, as described here on the screen, the public incitement to violence or hatred. So now I would move on to the next slide, which gives you a bit of where I would like to give you an overview of what has been the policy response specifically by the European Commission to support an effective response against hate crimes and hate speech. So the first that you see here is the EU high-level group. Oh, yeah, we stay on this slide. The EU high-level group on combating hate speech and hate crime, which is basically a forum where the Commission brings together member state representatives from the ministries of justice, usually, and the ministries of interior, as well as police and prosecutors, but also international organizations such as the Council of Europe, with whom we work very closely on a lot of these topics, the OECD, the Fundamental Rights Agency, etc., as well as many civil society organizations that are active on combating hate speech and hate crime. And under the high-level group, we recently restructured it. So now it consists of 5 work streams that focus on data collection and recording, on hate crime training, on capacity building for national law enforcement, on hate crime victims, and on online hate speech, as well as 2 very recent networks of justice professionals, so law enforcement and prosecutors that work on or are specialized in hate crimes and hate speech. So this is, from our side, a very exciting development, because now we can really work with the practitioners at the national level to help them in their responses to these types of crimes. And it's really priority to kind of bring the policy as closely as possible to practitioners. And a lot of these work streams and working groups are set up in collaboration with NGOs or international organizations, and we co-lead much of the work there together. Then the second element that we have in place to support especially civil society, so NGOs and other types of organizations, is the European Commission's Citizens' Equality, Rights and Values program. So this program has a particular priority on combating hate speech and hate crime, with annual funding rounds for projects that address these this topic from different angles that can be often, or that can be, for instance, victim support. So the specific support that victims of hate crimes need compared to, for example, other types of victims or victims of other crimes, let's say. But also we regularly fund projects that focus on combating online hate speech, for example. And I will be also very happy to share links to where you can find information about available funding and when the next funding cycle will open, which should be early 2027. But I can give more information about that in writing later. And then finally, I think what is maybe also especially from the online perspective, a very interesting policy development is the recently adopted Code of Conduct on Countering Illegal Hate Speech Online. And here we bring in the other important actors in the kind of online hate speech space, which are, of course, social media platforms and providers of certain digital services, let's say. And now we can move to the next slide. So this Code of Conduct on Countering Illegal Hate Speech Online has been, so we've had a code of conduct in place on this specific topic already since 2018. But with the adoption of some important legislation at EU level, in particular the Digital Services Act, there was a need to strengthen the response to online hate speech and to integrate, let's say, a new code under this new legal framework that we have. And the reason this has been really one of the key priorities of our work over the last couple of years is because of the systemic risks, basically, that hate speech poses for our democracy and for the fundamental rights of others specifically. And then that is, let's say, accelerated by it taking place online and by the fact that hate speech can be shared very quickly, very easily, also through artificial intelligence, for instance, across the world in just a couple of seconds. And so this is why we see it as extremely important to address online hate speech as such, as almost a kind of a self-standing phenomenon. So therefore, the Commission supported social media platforms. So these include all the very large online platforms that we have. So that would be, for example, Meta, TikTok, etc. But there's also some other platforms that are part of the code to basically agree on a new code that has some new elements to it that are more reactionary, that are actually more preventive, that focus on multi-stakeholder cooperation. So basically what the code does is that it helps platform deal and provide a process for how to deal with content that is deemed illegal hate speech according to EU law or member state law. And so it facilitates also compliance with the Digital Services Act. And there's a specific process in place for basically, or a specific commitment by the platforms on how to review and respond to illegal hate speech. And they, for example, one of the key commitments under the code is a 24-hour review time. So once hate speech or illegal hate speech is notified to the platforms, they have committed to review this within 24 hours, and when necessary, take down the content if it corresponds to the definition of illegal hate speech in a given member state. And another interesting or important aspect of the code, and I would say this is also very much at the heart of the Code of Conduct, is the annual monitoring exercise where NGOs that are specialized in addressing hate speech and hate crime monitor the response of the signatories to the code, so the social media platforms, to their notifications of illegal content. And this takes place for a certain period per year. And then together with these organizations, we analyze the responses and also publish reports about the response of the different social media platforms. Then there's some other additional kind of transparency and accountability commitments by the signatories, and the Commission supports, on the one hand, the platform. So we provide we, for example, have committed ourselves to building an online knowledge hub on online hate speech, and are working to connect also the platforms with a wider range of civil society organizations to really support the overall aim of combating online hate speech. But we are also working on a system of remuneration for the civil society organizations that do the monitoring reporting under the code. And this also is, of course, because we need to recognize the really big role of civil society organizations in this sphere of combating online hate speech. So this basically, I think, maybe gives you a bit of an overview of what the Commission has been doing around combating hate speech and hate crimes more generally. And I think the code is really an important example of how collaboration between the different actors that all have different expertise, different roles and responsibilities can lead to hopefully a more effective response to the very unfortunately very high prevalence of hate speech online. And with that, looking at the time as well, I would conclude my presentation. And I have not been monitoring the chat so much, but happy to take any questions on any of the things mentioned. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Elena. I think we'll certainly come back to some of the points that you've raised in the more general discussion with everybody a little bit later. But it's interesting you just mentioned the role there of civil society and monitoring what's going on. And Dorina had asked a question a little bit earlier on, where she said, how will people, if I understood correctly, there will be work for people to do in supervising population online. So how does everyone start to feel about that? Because that's also, of course, monitoring and has an impact in terms of free speech. So I don't know whether you have any thoughts on that, particularly before we have one or two other questions directed at you. For you.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always a need to balance different rights, and it's not something that can be. I don't think it's possible to generalize and say, this is always more important than the other. And what was mentioned, I mean, the threshold when we're talking, for example, about illegal hate speech and the criminal law response to that is there's a very clear threshold for this. So that is the public incitement to violence or hatred against certain groups or on the basis of certain grounds. And these have also been, of course, democratically agreed on. So this is not something that is decided by the Commission or by other actors that this should be the threshold, but this is actually applied every day by, in particular, courts. And so I would say that this is one aspect, and the other maybe is also looking from the other perspective. So what are the harms done by hate speech? Who are the victims? And if we're looking at the online sphere, there are, I mean, the prevalence is really quite extreme, and so there's also this flip side of the responsibility to address it and to prevent the harms that come from being subjected to high amounts of hate speech.
Sure, I'm right in saying, aren't I, that national law takes precedent here over European? So these are national laws that are being applied, right?
Yes, so it's always the national courts that apply the laws. Some of them come directly from obligations of EU law that then the member states transpose in their national criminal frameworks. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, it's national law provisions, but the origin of those provisions, for example, on hate speech and hate crime, also come from EU level legislation.
Okay, thanks. And then just before we move on, and Bella asked the question, and I think it's interesting to know in terms of signatories to the Code of Conduct, Is Telegram a signatory? Is X a signatory?
Yeah, so the signatories are Dailymotion, Facebook, Instagram, jeuxvideo.com, LinkedIn, Microsoft, Consumer Services, Snapchat, Rakuten, Viber, TikTok, Twitch, X, and YouTube. So Telegram is not a member.
It's not, exactly. I was just going to, so
and
X
maybe
is,
here,
yeah,
X is a member, and maybe here also just a point that I perhaps wasn't super clear on is that this code was adopted and is implemented by the signatories. So we support it, but it's actually a voluntary tool that they all themselves agreed to abide by and follow. So it's also on a voluntary basis that other social media providers can join, for instance. And of course, we are always happy to facilitate that. And
we'll probably come back to that in the general discussion as well too, about how that goes and how effective it is at the moment, because we know the code of conduct on disinformation, and we know that sometimes it's one thing to have a firm code, and there's something else, and if it actually is something that people have to pay attention to. Okay, Elena, thank you so much. You'll be staying with us to the end. It's my great pleasure then to welcome our third speaker this afternoon, and that's Maja Zarić. Maja is chair of the Council of Europe's Steering Committee on Media and Freedom of Expression, and I'm delighted to welcome her this afternoon to our session. Maja.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. I really enjoyed, Elena, your intervention. I'm very sorry for being a bit late for Renato's session. Unfortunately, I also had some troubles with my computer. So I will take you through the work of the Council of Europe, in particular CDMSI, that I chaired for 2 years. So this would be my last session as a chair. And in the next mandate, I will step up as a vice chair of the committee. So I also would like to thank you for raising this really important topic and for gathering us all, because for us it's really essential to hear all of the interventions and see what everybody else is doing. So as the chair of the Steering Committee of Media Information Society at the Council of Europe, I would just like to outline some of our essential work that we did in the last couple of years, given that the work builds up on the previous years of CDMSI work. So the CDMSI plays a key role in shaping laws and policies in the area of media freedom, information society, and digital governance. In recent years, we have adopted several key instruments that directly addresses these challenges that are posed by the digital age, and including regarding hate speech and media information literacy. I will now speak about the recommendation that was on combating hate speech, adopted in 2022 in May. And it is really document that we worked so hard on with a sister committee, and that is really crucial because it provides a comprehensive approach to combating this phenomenon. This comprehensive instrument also acknowledges that hate speech can lead to real harm, affecting individuals' ability to participate in society and undermining democratic engagement. The recommendation provides a definition of hate speech, and I will now just, because Elena more specific about the definition, just read out that for the purposes of this recommendation, hate speech is understood as all types of expression that incite, promote, spread, or justify violence, hatred, discrimination against person or a group of persons that denigrates them by a reason of real or attributed personal characteristics or status such race, color, language, religion, nationality, national or ethnic origin, age, disability, sex, gender identity, and sexual orientation. Now, this is very important. Very important recommendation that provides a definition that I just read out that builds on the European Charter of Human Rights and the case law as well, and is also intended to enable states and all relevant stakeholders to first identify and then deal with the hate speech in a synchronized manner. It sets out a broad set of measures, both legal and non-legal, to protect individuals and groups against hate speech, with the framework of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. It does so by requiring a carefully calibrated approach where laws, policies, guidelines, and other measures are set up to effectively prevent and combat hate speech based on its severity, the harm that it causes, and its impact on members of particular groups in different contexts. It also provides specific guidance with respect to online hate speech, ensuring it's equally covered and effectively addressed. Inter alia, all governments are recommended to adopt clear and foreseeable legal provisions that enable the swift and effective removal of content prohibited under the criminal, civic, and administrative law, while clearly defining the respective duties and responsibilities of state and non-state actors and establishing rules for effective cooperation. The member states should also ensure the accessible and effective mechanisms for reporting online hate speech and require internet intermediaries operating within their jurisdictions to respect and uphold human rights across their operations and policies. In parallel, to improve the detection, reporting, and processing of online hate speech while avoiding unjustified content restrictions and overcompliance, member states should regularly publish reports on containing relevant information and statistics and ensure that independent authorities working in cooperation with internet intermediaries, civil society organizations, and other stakeholders are enabled to regularly assess and improve existing content moderation systems. The Council of Europe approach is integrally based on the recognition that to be effective, member states shall not act alone. Hate speech is a complex, deep-rooted, evolving phenomenon, and addressing it in a meaningful manner requires the involvement of several key stake actors, notably the internet intermediaries, public officials, elected bodies, political parties, civil society organizations, and the media. And we were also focusing on media. This section of the recommendation, or if you want to call it a topic as a whole, is also considered as fundamental because marked by wars, elections, and continuous digital transformations, information shapes the society. And ensuring the provision of accurate and reliable information is crucial for fostering community resilience, promoting a culture of tolerance, preventing discriminatory behaviors, safeguarding democratic processes. Media can not only raise the public awareness, but through their wide reach, media outlets can also play a very positive role in highlighting the harmful effects of hate speech, fostering a culture that rejects such behavior. The promotion of stories that celebrate diversity and inclusivity can be instrumental to cultivate understanding and tolerance within society, but also by condemning this hate speech and promoting respectful discourse, media can counter misinformation and stereotypes that often fuel hate speech, providing the public with accurate and balanced information and generating empathy and support to targets and victims. Also, we have a necessary addition. It's very true that media can do much to prevent and combat hate speech, but it's also very true and fact that media are too often targeted by hate speech, insulted, threatened, harassed, attacked, online and offline. The variety of threats to which journalists and other actors are subjected is immersive and alarming. To address hate speech against journalists specifically and other threats impeding journalists' everyday job, the Council of Europe's campaign, in particular that was entrusted to the CDMSI by the Committee of Ministers, Safety of Journalists, it stresses that states should do everything to ensure the safety of journalists. The measures that are called in the recommendation 2022-16 on combating hate speech are not only relevant for lawmakers, but they also emphasize the role of education, media information literacy, the use of counter speech, and critical tools in responding to hate speech and fostering a culture of inclusivity and mutual respect. This recommendation recognizes that the hate speech is not simply a legal issue. It is rooted in deeper social and cultural challenges, including disinformation, negative stereotyping, and stigmatization of individuals and groups. These issues require multifaceted response that combines legal action with long-term strategies and preventing and counteracting hate speech. And then we come to the media information literacy that we also see as a one tool or a pillar that we can rely on in combating also the hate speech. It is also a topic that the CDMSI has put very highly on the agenda and central strategy in preventing and addressing hate speech. By promoting media information literacy, we enable individuals, in particular young people and those who have limited digital literacy, such as certain elderly populations, for example, to develop critical skills that they need to navigate digital platforms and identify the harmful content and engage in ethical online communication. The recommendation on combating hate speech stresses also the human rights education for democratic citizenship and media information literacy should be integrated into national education systems. Literacy should be, media information literacy should help people not only to recognize hate speech, but also to understand its roots and how to counteract with its alternative narratives, to promote human rights, equality, respect for diversity. The CDMSI also recently adopted a policy document on national media information literacy strategies that was 10 days ago. The document is a crucial step in promoting media information literacy as a foundational component of democratic citizenship, and it provides member states with very actionable advice to develop and implement national strategies that equip citizens to critically evaluate information and engage responsibly in the digital environment. And also, media information literacy is very important for all the citizens. We must recognize the vulnerable groups, including minorities, marginalized communities, and particularly at risk for negative effects of hate speech and online harm. These groups often lack digital skills to crucially evaluate information and disproportionately targeted are by discriminatory rhetoric online. The Council of Europe is committed to ensuring that media information literacy reaches underserved and vulnerable groups. As emphasized in our recent policy document on media information literacy strategies, there is a need for targeted awareness initiatives and educational outreach to ensure that these groups are equipped with the tools to identify and respond to hate speech in ways that promote social inclusion, digital resilience, and human rights. So in conclusion, I would say that through the CDMSI, Council of Europe is addressing hate speech in all its forms, online and offline, and is promoting media information literacy in a way that it helps individuals critically engage with digital information and promotes human rights, democracy, and rule of law. Through our recommendation and policy documents, including the one recommendation on countering hate speech, combating hate speech, and the policy documents on media information literacy strategies, we're providing member states with the documents and tools so they can use them and create more inclusive, resilient, and human rights-centered digital environments. So I will stop now, and I'm open to your question. Oh, I see now in the chat.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Maja. Let me try and put some of the points that are in. Thank you very much for your really interesting talk. First of all, I'm going to start maybe at the end, if you like, because I think a lot of the people who are attending this afternoon are coming from our media literacy, digital media literacy community. And of course, we very much welcome what you're saying. But then I do have to quote directly from one of the last questions there from Dorina. She says, media information literacy can help, but that's not enough. Respect for each other is cultural. I think she means crucial probably there as well too, in terms of respect for each one another's cultural differences. What do you think? It's not enough media literacy?
I can say from a personal point of view, because I'm also not only a policymaker, but also a media literacy practitioner. So I think it's crucial and essential. Of course, it's not enough. Only the comprehensive approach that we all spoke about Elena and Renato as well, as I heard, can maybe be enough, but it needs to be continuous. So it's not, a project cycle. It has to be done all the time, all the way, within all of our roles. So I have to do it in my role at work, in Council of Europe, back home, but as well in my own home with my two daughters. So it's a non-stop job, I think. And media information literacy is that. It's the equipment, the set of skills and knowledge that needs to be provided to all citizens. So be it parents, be it children from the kindergarten. And I think this is also crucial because combating stereotypes, hate speech, cultural differences, it can also be learned at a very young age. So it has also to be mirrored in the media content that they watch and follow, the influencers that they follow, the parents that are at home. And then while they're growing, we also need to be better. Yeah. So we need, I think it's not enough, but it's also mandatory. So this is my personal takeaway on media information literacy.
Said with passion. Thank you very much. I'd like to invite maybe Elena and Renato back to the screen as well too, so we have an opportunity for some final discussion. And I would like to start because there's an absolutely passionate message there from Katrina Dorica, which probably Elena and Renato have had a chance to read, and I'll just read it for you. She says, "I'm a disinformation researcher in the Baltics. We're experiencing a huge disinformation and hate speech wave in all of the social media. At the moment, we're called Nazis, idiots, disabled nations, etc. on a daily basis. We go on reporting these messages as a hate speech, but the social media do not react." And she even quotes us then to her reaction, or not her reaction, to the research that they're carrying out. And my question, she says, is to any presenter today, based on this research and big social network failure, what are the further steps that we can do to protect everybody in our information environment? I mean, we spoke briefly about this, Elena, in terms of the code of conduct, but can I just maybe get around from all of you in terms of your take at the moment on what we can do to really get these social media platforms to do something about hate speech? I mean, you talk about 24 hours. 24 hours is a hell of a long time, Maja, in terms of waiting for something to happen. So maybe I could start with you, Renato.
Well, thanks very much for the question. I must say, a little bit puzzled because in the recent times I hear reports of both kinds. On one hand, I hear reports like this saying, I keep on bumping into examples of hate speech, etc., and I report them, and the platform is very slow in removing them. Whereas on the other hand, I keep also hearing people from saying, I'm being shadow banned. I used to have 10,000 followers. Now I can see only 1,000. And there is a certain equilibrium in the two in terms of occurrences of the two. So my suspicion is that maybe social platform, I don't know if to attribute them well by the initial reportings of examples of hate speech. And at the same time, maybe they've been trying a different approach, which is indeed the one of shadow banning, okay? Because in the end, platforms want to keep people on them, okay? I don't want to chase you out of Facebook so that you go to YouTube and things. So my suspicion is that somehow they're trying via the algorithm to create micro or not so micro bubbles where people can exchange all sorts of example of hate speech while not going to while trying to leave alone people who would be the target of this hate speech. I don't know how to test this hypothesis, but as I said, I keep hearing both kind of reportings.
Yeah. Elena, what about you?
I mean, I can Yeah, I think we definitely hear a lot of these types of reports, so that reporting often also in certain national contexts more than others, for instance, smaller countries where maybe language capacities of the platforms are not what they should be. So that's also a factor. But we also definitely see, reports around not reaching certain review targets or instances of allegedly illegal hate speech remaining online for too long and not being addressed. And so definitely that is a problem. And I would say specifically about the Digital Services Act, it fully entered into force earlier this year. Of course, some of the obligations have been enforced for longer. But it's it's a big instrument that aims to address also, the systemic risks that we have, including with relation to freedom of speech and addressing illegal hate speech. But this takes some time to take a grip. And I think then we need to look at both positive enforcement avenues. So that, for example, is the code of conduct, where we have had very good collaboration with the signatories over the last year. Even, of course, the global discussion around freedom of speech and hate online has shifted, and it's a more difficult context now, definitely. But we do see a positive and kind of constructive collaboration under the code. At the same time, there's also a need for, let's say, more reactive measures, and those are, for example, the investigations under the DSA some are ongoing, some have also already been concluded. There have been certain fines, and so there's these both ends, but we will need to see, how it develops specifically with the Digital Services Act. In the meantime, I would say beyond the legal development, we remain, from the Commission side, we are very committed to look at what are also the experiences of the various NGOs. And I would also, in that respect, thank the person who shared this report, because we, of course, don't see all of the reports. But it's always interesting to hear about these examples of concrete research around the response to illegal hate speech by platforms.
Just on that, Elena, I don't know whether you want to put a contact or something, or we can facilitate that. If people would like to forward you more of that kind of research results, we'd be happy to facilitate that or indeed if there's a link or something you can give us, that would be very helpful, because I think indeed what you're keen on is the connect with civil society, and we too, of course, because we work with a lot of those kinds of organizations. Maja, what about you? Any comment on that?
Yes, well, I have to say that on the level of policy and CDMSI, in 2018, we produced a recommendation for member states on the roles and responsibilities of internet intermediaries, and that was 2018. So within also this recommendation on hate speech, we recall the recommendation on the roles and responsibilities of internet intermediaries. And of course, it's all in line with the EU activities and everybody else. So we call for member states to create clear rules and procedures for effective cooperation between those actors regarding the assessment and investigation of online hate speech that is prohibited under the criminal, civil, and administrative laws. And we also require from member states, we say the member states should require that internet intermediaries operating under their jurisdiction should respect human rights, including the legislation on hate speech, to apply by the principles of human rights due diligence throughout their operations and policies, to take measures in line with the existing frameworks and procedures to combat hate speech. So the policy documents, as I see, are encompassing all of and addressing these problems. But then we also have the problem in implementation from the internet intermediaries and big companies. At the Council of Europe, we also have a digital partnership, and at CDMSI, we from time to time we try to have exchanges. We had a few exchanges with Meta. We call them to participate, to come to our meetings, and and then to exchange our views on certain policies issues. So, but in reality, I think we're overflooded, and so it's very, very difficult problem that needs to be tackled from various sides, and also mutually by different, I think, different organizations, actors, international organizations. So we all need to step up and try to actually deal with this problem. It cannot be done by, it's not a one-man show on this side. So all of the efforts, I think, are very, very welcome. But then the technology, it develops so swiftly, and we always somehow end up lagging behind in terms of so it's difficult, but never stop fighting, I would say.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, it certainly isn't, in terms of, Renato talks about the legal stuff, so the laws are moving on at national, European level, and meanwhile then we have the policies sort of moving along with it as well too. So but I think maybe sort of just a last question from our part, I mean, what would you advise to many of the people who are with us today and people in our community who are very much the civil society organizations working around media and information literacy? What can they do? How can they keep themselves informed? It's really hard to keep up to date with this kind of information, to know, what are there guidelines, are there resources? Could each of you maybe point us to even one good resource or one good, link or something that might be useful? Ellen, I see you nodding first. So, I mean, have you something you could recommend for our audience?
Yes, I think, if the audience, for those who are interested in what we are doing in terms of the policy and for instance, also the reports that will be published about the monitoring of the code of conduct, I shared already our website, and there that includes many different links to relevant websites or materials or research that has been published
Good.
around this topic.
Yeah. We'll make sure that goes to everybody, of course, who's attending as well too, in terms of, and also within the association, we're very keen to carry news stories, to carry ongoing information. So feel free to use us as a conduit. Renato, I suppose keeping up to date with the clips is probably the best bet for the moment, is it? What would you suggest? Your mic's off.
Sorry.
Lovely.
I would suggest, if people have the time, maybe during the Christmas holiday, to visit also the website of the European Court of Human Rights, and by typing in free speech or hate speech, look at the case law, because it's one way of realizing that, as always, the devil is in the detail. And by reading different cases, you will be surprised how in some of them you will agree completely with the court, in other you will disagree. And so what I'm saying, I understand the difficulty of people of keeping up with all this, and but I think it's an intrinsic difficulty in a way, because
and indeed,
particular instances will be always problematic.
Yeah. And indeed, we've seen that being applied in classrooms, for example. I think in Luxembourg, that's one of the approaches they do. They take specific cases and they debate them with students in the room. And you start to really get down to the nitty gritty of what actually is hate speech. So I'm not sure whether all of us over Christmas holidays, you have a legal background. So I think you might find it more joyful than the rest of us. But thank you for the suggestion. Maja, what about you?
Well, I really, the top of my mind is now the latest document of the CDMSI, but that is meant for member states and policy level. But then on a personal level, I'm always searching and reading, and also I was contributing to handbooks on media information literacy for parents, and then public officials, then educators, teachers throughout the years. So I think that there is a lot of material, really engaging examples, very, very great practices across borders. And it it can serve as an inspiration, but it should inspire us to do something, just a little step in our micro bubble, I would say, and then we take it from there. So on a policy level, that's one thing. We have policy documents, we have on the Council of Europe recommendations, then on EU side, all the acquis, we have different organizations, very rich with documents and so on. But then on a personal level, I think we all need to keep up that fire, that lightning, that drive, that we actually do an extra step. So this is something that I think is very much needed, because policy needs to be turned into actions, and we are the people, we do the action. So this would, whatever you can read or just get inspired by, I think it's fine.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to the three of you, really, Elena, Renato, and Maja. You've helped to make a subject which is pretty dense, a lot more acceptable and open and easier for us to understand. So I'd like to thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. And I think, Chloe, we just wanted to remind people about a couple of dates before we sign off for today. So Chloe's busy putting links, as you can see, into the chat of various links that you can use. I would like to thank everybody, really, on our behalf, also for the whole year. It's been a really interesting year of Wednesday webinars. I hope you've enjoyed them. Do stay in contact with us. And as you can see on the screen, on spring, we have lots of, spring is maybe January is a little early for spring, but from the new year, we'll have lots of new sessions. Wednesday, 21st of January, we'll be talking about gender and representation, which you mentioned a little bit earlier. 18th of February, verifying what we see, and that's introducing vis-a-vis on visual misinformation. Wednesday, the 20th of May, then, we'll be talking about from policy to practice, advancing generative AI literacy in higher education. So stay in touch, follow. There will be other sessions as well between February and May. So stay in tune, stay in contact with us to find out what's coming up. All of our sessions are available on the YouTube channel, and of course on the website, Media Learning website, you'll find out about all of our activities. And all I have to do really is say Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you so much to everybody who's been with us, and I hope you've enjoyed the session this afternoon and that you have a wonderful, restful break over the Christmas holidays and a brilliant, bright start to 2026. Thank you all. Bye-bye now. Thanks, Chloe. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.